Preface of the Nursery Alice. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Nursery Alice by Lewis Carroll. Preface. Addressed to any mother. I have reason to believe that Alice's Adventures in Wonderland has been read by some hundreds of English children, aged from 5 to 15. Also by children aged from 15 to 25, yet again by children aged from 25 to 35, and even by children, for there are such, children in whom no waning of health and strength, no weariness of the solemn mockery and the gaudy glitter and the hopeless misery of life has availed to parch the pure fountain of joy that wells up in all childlike hearts. Children of a certain age, whose tale of years must be left untold, and buried in respectful silence. And my ambition now is it a vain one, to be read by children aged from 0 to 5. To be read? Nay, not so. Say rather to be thumbed, to be cooed over, to be dog's-eared, to be rumpled, to be kissed by the illiterate, ungrammatical, dimpled darlings that fill your nursery with merry uproar, and your inmost heart of hearts with a restful gladness. Such, for instance, as a child I once knew, who, having been carefully instructed that 1 of any earthly thing was enough for any little girl, and that to ask for 2 buns, 2 oranges, 2 of anything, would certainly bring upon her the awful charge of being greedy, was found one morning sitting up in bed, solemnly regarding her 2 little naked feet, and murmuring to herself, softly and penitently, "Dee-dee." Eastertide, 1889. End of preface. Chapter 1 of The Nursery Alice by Lewis Carroll. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The White Rabbit. Once upon a time there was a little girl called Alice, and she had a very curious dream. Would you like to hear what it was that she dreamed about? Well, this is the first thing that happened. A white rabbit came running by in a great hurry, and just as it passed Alice, it stopped and took its watch out of its pocket. Wasn't that a funny thing? Did you ever see a rabbit that had a watch and a pocket to put it in? Of course, when a rabbit has a watch, it must have a pocket to put it in. It would never do to carry it about in its mouth, and it wants its hands sometimes to run about with. Hasn't it got pretty pink eyes? I think all white rabbits have pink eyes, and pink ears, and a nice brown coat, and you can just see its red pocket handkerchief peeping out of its coat pocket. And what with its blue necktie and its yellow waistcoat, it really is very nicely dressed.
Oh dear, said the rabbit. I shall be too late.
What would it be too late for, I wonder? Well, you see, it had to go and visit the Duchess. You'll see a picture of the Duchess soon, sitting in her kitchen. And the Duchess was a very cross old lady, and the rabbit knew she'd be very angry indeed if he kept her waiting. So the poor thing was as frightened could be. Don't you see how he's trembling? Just shake the book a little from side to side, and you'll soon see him tremble. Because he thought the Duchess would have his head cut off for a punishment. That was what the Queen of Hearts used to do when she was angry with people. You'll see a picture of her soon. At least she used to order their heads to be cut off, and she always thought it was done, though they never really did it. And so, when the White Rabbit ran away, Alice wanted to see what would happen to it. So she ran after it, and she ran, till she tumbled right down the rabbit hole. And then she had a very long fall indeed, down and down and down, till she began to wonder if she was going right through the world, so as to come out on the other side. It was just like a very deep well, only there was no water in it. If anybody really had such a fall as that, it would kill them most likely. But you know, it doesn't hurt a bit to fall in a dream, because all the time you think you're falling, you really are lying somewhere safe and sound and fast asleep. However, this terrible fall came to an end at last, and down came Alice on a heap of sticks and dry leaves. But she wasn't a bit hurt, and up she jumped and ran after the rabbit again. And so that was the beginning of Alice's curious dream. And next time you see a white rabbit, try and fancy you're going to have a curious dream, just like dear little Alice. How Alice Grew Tall. And so, after Alice had tumbled down the rabbit hole and had run a long, long way underground, all of a sudden she found herself in a great hall with doors all around it. But all the doors were locked, so you see poor Alice couldn't get out of the hall, and that made her very sad. However, after a little while she came to a little table all made of glass with 3 legs. There are 2 of the legs in the picture, and just the beginning of the other leg. Do you see? And on the table was a little key, and she went around the hall and tried if she could unlock any of the doors with it. Poor Alice! The key wouldn't unlock any of the doors. But at last she came upon a tiny little door, and oh, how glad she was when she found the key would fit it! So she unlocked the tiny little door, and she stooped down and looked through it. And what do you think she saw? Oh, such a beautiful garden! And she did so long to go into it. But the door was far too small. She couldn't squeeze herself through any more than you could squeeze yourself into a mouse hole. So poor little Alice locked up the door and took the key back to the table again, and this time she found quite a new thing on it. Now look at the picture again. What do you think it was? It was a little bottle with a label tied to it, with the words, "Drink me," on the label. So she tasted it, and it was very nice. So she set to work and drank it up. And then such a curious thing happened to her. You'll never guess what it was, so I shall have to tell you. She got smaller and smaller, till at last she was just the size of a little doll. Then she said to herself, "Now I'm the right size to get through the little door." And away she ran. But when she got there, the door was locked, and the key was on the top of the table, and she couldn't reach it. Wasn't it a pity she had locked up the door again? Well, the next thing she found was a little cake, and it had the words, "Eat me," marked on it. So, of course, she set to work and ate it up. And then, what do you think happened to her? No, you'll never guess. I shall have to tell you again. She grew, and she grew, and she grew, taller than she was before, taller than any child, taller than any grown-up person, taller and taller and taller. Just look at the picture and you'll see how tall she got. Which would you have liked the best, do you think? To be a little tiny Alice, no larger than a kitten, or a great tall Alice, with your head always knocking against the ceiling? The Pool of Tears. Perhaps you think Alice must have been very much pleased when she had eaten the little cake to find herself growing so tremendously tall. Because of course it would be easy enough now to reach the little key off the glass table and to open the little tiny door. Well, of course she could do that, but what good was it to get the door open when she couldn't get through? She was worse off than ever, poor thing. She could just manage by putting her head down close to the ground to look through with one eye. But that was all she could do. No wonder the poor tall child sat down and cried as if her heart would break. So she cried and she cried, and her tears ran down the middle of the hall like a deep river, and very soon there was quite a large pool of tears reaching halfway down the hall. And there she might have stayed till this very day, if the White Rabbit hadn't happened to come through the hall on his way to visit the Duchess. He was dressed up as grand could be, and he had a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a little fan in the other hand, and he kept on muttering to himself, "Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she be savage if I've kept her waiting?" But he didn't see Alice, you know, so when she began to say, "If you please, sir," her voice seemed to come from the top of the hall because her head was so high up. And the rabbit was dreadfully frightened, and he dropped the gloves and the fan and ran away as hard as he could go. Then a very curious thing indeed happened. Alice took up the fan and began to fan herself with it. And lo and behold, she got quite small again, and all in a minute she was just about the size of a mouse. Now look at the picture and you'll soon guess what happened next. It looks just like the sea, doesn't it? But it really is the pool of tears, all made of Alice's tears, you know. And Alice has tumbled into the pool, and the mouse has tumbled in, and there they are, swimming about together. Doesn't Alice look pretty as she swims across the picture? You can just see her blue stockings far away under the water. But why is the mouse swimming away from Alice in such a hurry? Well, the reason is that Alice began talking about cats and dogs, and a mouse always hates talking about cats and dogs. Suppose you were swimming about in a pool of your own tears, and suppose somebody began talking to you about lesson books and bottles of medicine. Wouldn't you swim away as hard as you could go? The Caucus Race. When Alice and the mouse had got out of the pool of tears, of course they were very wet, and so were a lot of other curious creatures that had tumbled in as well. There was a dodo, that's the great bird in front leaning on a walking stick, and a duck, and a lory, that's just behind the duck looking over its head, and an eaglet, that's on the left-hand side of the lory, and several others. Well, and so they didn't know how in the world they were going to get dry again. But the dodo, who was a very wise bird, told them the right way was to have a caucus race. And what do you think that was? You don't know? Well, you are an ignorant child. Now be very attentive, and I'll soon cure you of your ignorance. First, you must have a race course. It ought to be a sort of circle, but it doesn't much matter what shape it is, so long as it goes a good way around and joins on to itself again. Then you must put all the racers on the course, here and there. It doesn't matter where, so long as you don't crowd them too much together. Then you needn't say 1, 2, 3 and away, but let them all set off running just when they like, and leave off just when they like. So all these creatures, Alice and all, went on running round and round till they were all quite dry again. And then the dodo said, everybody won, and everybody must have prizes. Of course Alice had to give them their prizes, and she had nothing to give them but a few comfits she happened to have in her pocket. And there was just one apiece all around. And there was no prize for Alice. So what do you think they did? Alice had nothing left but her thimble. Now look at the picture, and you'll see what happened. "Hand it over here," said the dodo. Then the dodo took the thimble and handed it back to Alice, and said, "We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble." And then all the other creatures cheered. Wasn't that a curious sort of present to give her? Suppose they wanted to give you a birthday present. Would you rather they should go to your toy cupboard and pick out your nicest doll and say, "Here, my love, here's a lovely birthday present for you"? Or would you rather them to give you something new, something that didn't belong to you before? End of Chapter 4. Bill the Lizard. Now I'm going to tell you about Alice's adventures in the White Rabbit's house. Do you remember how the rabbit dropped his gloves and his fan when he was so frightened at hearing Alice's voice that seemed to come down from the sky? Well, of course he couldn't go to visit the Duchess without his gloves and his fan, so after a bit he came back again to look for them. By this time the dodo and all the other curious creatures had gone away, and Alice was wandering about all alone. So what do you think he did? Actually, he thought she was his housemaid and began ordering her about.